Welcome to Thought in Motion, the seminars of Jacques Lacan. Today we'll be working through Seminar 1 in the section, The Moment of Resistance, Lecture 4, entitled The Ego and the Other, pages 43 to 51 in the English translation. A central idea to address today is the distinction between full speech and empty speech. Empty speech is very close to how we ordinarily think of speech. It entails an intentional communication directed at a listener seeking to understand that message. It's demonstrated in Lacan's retelling of Freud's forgetting a name of a painter, Signorelli, while conversing with his interlocutor. Nothing was particularly out of the ordinary, and stories were shared with the belief that they would interest his travel partner. This could be considered what Heidegger called chatter or idle talk. It is for Heidegger a kind of expression that has had understanding already built in or attached to it, and so it does not reveal anything new concerning the being of beings. For Lacan, this is speech that does not reveal any truth of or from the unconscious, but rather takes place in the field of the ego and mediates its relation to the other, but an other that is a mirror to the ego and not a radical alterity. Full speech, in contrast, occurs in a way that disrupts empty speech, in the moments of forgetting, the slips of the tongue, and other kinds of bungled actions. Full speech is spoken through deformation, and the revelation of the unconscious truth occurs at these moments of failure. For this reason, full speech is not expression, not what we typically think of as speech, for it reveals itself at moments when expression fails, in the silences, and in the scraps of speech that remain in the wake of those failures. While conversing with his travel partner, Freud's speech halts as he's unable to retrieve the name Signorelli. He engages in a kind of associative exercise with those scraps of speech that remain, eventually leading his thoughts to an experience with a patient who told him that without his sexual potency, life wasn't worth living, and another occasion in which he was informed about the death of a former patient. This moment of forgetting spoke the truth of what Freud, to some degree at least, was repressing, that of sex and death. Full speech is not mediation. It is not expression. Rather, it is what Lacan calls veridical speech, that is, speech that reveals the truth of the unconscious. The whole of Freud's work unfolds in the dimension of revelation and not of expression. Revelation is the ultimate source of what we are searching for in the analytic experience. It is this revelatory feature of speech that the analyst seeks after, and where interpretation is to take place. Interpretation should not be understood as shedding light on some pre-existing meaning in speech. Rather, it's about producing a meaning in the reconstruction of the subject's history. But, as Lacan mentions, interpretations are fraught with dangers of intentional imputations and projections by the analyst, and can be where speech directed toward the other moves from not just mediation, but to implicit violence, as the other is reduced to a correlative function of the subject's ego. So if speech speaks the truth of the unconscious, and that truth is what has been repressed, then what is being repressed? Lacan makes it a point in Lecture 4 to distinguish two terms that are sometimes confused. One is often translated as repudiation in the Standard Edition, and for Lacan takes on the meaning of rejection. A rejection that has nothing to do with the other term, which is repression. Because in order for there to be repression, there must be that which was repressed, the beyond the repressed. This distinction will be important later on for the difference between psychosis and neurosis. Repression thus entails not just the act itself, but also that which is beyond repression, the original nucleus of the repressed by and through which all secondary repressions occur. In returning to the notion of a pathogenic nucleus, I want to offer a clarification of something I said in an earlier video. Previously, I stated that the pathogenic nucleus and the ego are one and the same. I recognize now that this requires some further nuance. Resistance appears to emanate from both. As Lacan states in the Irae, resistance is essentially an ego phenomenon. And yet, at the same time, the central core of repression, the pathogenic nucleus, appears to exert, quote, a positive repulsive force. This led me to conclude that the ego is the pathogenic nucleus. But in fact, we are talking about two different levels here. First, there is the cause of the resistance, the unanalyzable kernel of the symptom, the pathogenic nucleus. And then there's the manifestation of resistance in speech, which is more directly related to the ego in the form of empty speech. This resistance in speech is the ego itself, whereas the resistance of the unconscious nucleus is not resistance at all in the sense that we're talking about it here, but is rather better thought of in terms of repetition. So what then is this resistance? Lacan states that resistance is produced at the moment when the speech of revelation is not said, when the subject can no longer get himself out of it. He hooks on to the other because what is pressing towards speech cannot attain it. It is a speech reduced to its function of relationship to the other. If speech then functions as mediation, it is on account of its revelation not having been accomplished. Resistance, then, is embodied in the system of the ego and other. The level on which the other is experienced locates the level the ego exists for the subject. We might say that resistance is when we think we understand what has been said and what we are saying. It's what stagnates speech by stamping it with a definitive meaning. Unlike the truth of science, which prizes certainty over doubt, when it comes to the truth of the unconscious, doubt leads us more to truth than does certainty. Here are the central points of today's video. 1. Empty speech is speech that takes place in the field of the ego. 2. Full speech reveals the truth of the unconscious, not through expression, but through moments of failed speech. 3. Moments of resistance occur at the point at which speech no longer reveals the truth of the unconscious and is embodied in the captivating relation between ego and other. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.